Welcome to Walking with Jesus Bible Study. We're going to be in the book of Jonah, chapter 1, verse 2. And this is God speaking to the prophet Jonah. Arise, go to Nineveh, the great city, and cry against it, for their wickedness is come up before me. And I'm going to repeat that. Arise, go to Nineveh and the great city and cry against it, for their wickedness is come up before me. We can become so impatient with constant interruptions when working on a project. Sometimes it's very challenging to even get back on the task when we stop and start again. Here, God clearly tells Jonah to get up and to travel and to go to the city, which he would lay everything down and just go to continue forward. But he doesn't. He gets up and he runs away. He doesn't continue on with his mission. He sidetracks. He doesn't want to do it because it's such an evil place. The devil's getting into his brain. He's got doubts. He's got fear. Even though that God clearly gave him a task because God had faith in him. God knew that he could do it. God chose him. He didn't think he was worthy. Didn't think he was a man to do it. The task was too much. Forget the fact that God chose him. He's letting the devil get a hold of him with this fear and this doubt that he's not worthy. He can't do it. He's not the man for the job. The people there are just too terrible. He will be killed. He's not going to make it. This was a suicide mission. He's not putting his trust in God. God wouldn't send him there if he knew he was just going to die. But he's leaning onto his own understanding. He's leaning onto his own knowledge. His own way of thinking. But as we can see how the story goes, what does it do? It just prolongs the inevitable. Because God chose him for a reason. He's still going to do what God chose him to do. Now it's just taking him longer to finish the task. He's getting sidetracked. Oh, but when we surrender to what God tells us to do, the things that happen, when we obey God, woo! Man, when he finally gets up out of that belly fish and goes and completes the task that God had given him to do, that God knew he could do, that God built him to do, this was the most terrible place. Out of all the prophets and all the stories in the book, they were saying things that they didn't want to hear. And if they didn't repent, they was going to have to suffer great things. Because God kept giving them warning and kept giving them warning. Or they'll be given into captivity. Here, in this particular story, he knew it was such an evil place that he just knew he was just going to die because the people was just so evil. The city was just so evil. But when he completed the task, this was the first city out of all the ones that was all evil and disobeying, turned around and obeyed. They repented. That's what makes this story so great out of like all the ones, because this is the first time that someone listened and obeyed the first time. It's also very funny how like all the other prophets immediately obeyed God right away and told the people what they needed to hear, and they refused to listen. They refused to repent. They refused to obey. This prophet was the first one that ran away from God and didn't obey him until God came after him. Then when he finally did what he was told to do, the people actually obeyed. If this wasn't the total opposite story of what happens in all the other times in the Bible, it's just amazing. Because this is the first city that repented and changed their ways. And then Jonah wants to get upset. He's mad. He's furious with God because he didn't do what he said about destroying the city. You know, in the scriptures it says that if a prophet prophesies and then what he prophesies didn't come true, that we should not listen to that prophet, that he is a false prophet. And that is very true. So a lot of people like to argue and say that the Bible contradicts itself, because here it says when John prophesied, said that the city would be destroyed with a certain mountain, and then it didn't get destroyed. But they don't pay attention. They're leaning on their own understanding. It clearly says that God said you need to repent, or I will destroy you. They repented, so it didn't get destroyed. He's still speaking. He's still a prophecy of God. It didn't make him a liar. It didn't mean he wasn't from God. It just shows the mercy of God. It just shows that God keeps his word, because he said to repent. It's not this city's fault that they're the first ones to ever obey God. Maybe the other people were just jealous at all the other generations that when they was told to do something, they didn't listen. They didn't obey. They didn't repent. And so then all of a sudden, all the evil things that God said was going to happen, happened. And that is showing in how Jonah reacted to it. That's exactly how Jonah started to feel. He doesn't think it's fair. He doesn't think that this city deserved it. He don't think they was worthy. Well, we got to remember, it's not up to us to decide who's worthy and who's not. God can save whoever he wants to save. We don't get to pick and choose for him. We can't say, oh, that's not right, God, because they're so evil. Why would you save them? That's just totally unfair. No, it's unfair for him not to save people who repented. Because if you can't save people who do something wrong, then why are we even bothered being saved? Then we don't deserve to be saved too. Because we've all done something wrong. And in God's eyes, a sin's a sin. Disobeying is still disobeying. We can't rate it on degrees of levels of one is worse than the other. It's all still wrong. And this is why we don't get to, this is why we are called unjust and not righteous, because we do not judge righteously. We don't serve fair justice. We're too biased. Because we're too busy living in our feelings. If we was to do that, then we wouldn't be able to get saved ourselves. Because God would just have to simply say, no, nobody listens. Nobody deserves to get saved. And we would all just die. If he was to go by that method, we would all, he was like, well, you've all done wrong, so you all deserve to just die. Nobody deserves to be born again. Nobody deserves to come into my kingdom because you all sin. You are all sinners. It says in the scriptures that we are evil. We are born of sin. We are conceived of sin. We are all sinners. We are all, none of us is good. None of us is right. None of us is holy. So none of us deserve anything, let alone life. In fact, we've done nothing besides be evil and destroyed everything else that he created. Changed the very existence of the things he created due to our evil, due to our disobedience. But God is merciful and he loves everyone.